Welcome back to yet another episode of your Re-Educated podcast. Today we have an extremely special returning guest, Amna Mawaz Khan. She is a prominent Pakistani dancer, political organizer, and advocate for cultural preservation, known for her work in reviving and promoting classical South Asian dance forms, particularly Bharatanatyam. She has used her art to challenge societal norms and address critical social issues such as women's rights, freedom of expression, and political activism in Pakistan. She is also a founding member of Lal Hartal, a collective of artists and activists dedicated to fostering resistance through creative expression. Her performances often weave together dance, history, and activism, creating a powerful platform for change. How are you doing today?
Thank you. And you?
Yeah, I am. Thanks for asking. We were chatting briefly earlier. I had a hard conversation with a friend earlier who's been going through a big life change with a relationship coming to an end after such a long time. And, it's actually something a guest had said once. We had spoken to a wonderful woman named Candice Bertotti, and she's a conflict resolution expert, and she talked a little bit about something that she likes to do in her classroom is when people come in, you never actually know what someone may or may not be going through. And so the way she liked to start her classes was always to just ask everyone, if there's something you want to get off your chest before we start today, like turn to the person next to you and let's actually just share. Maybe you're going through something hard at home, whatever it is, but leave whatever you're going through at the door so we can explore this space together in a different place. So I just felt like I always find it helpful to kind of get it off my chest before I start the podcast. So I'm like, okay, now I'm ready to fully commit. Do you relate with that a little bit?
For sure. I think that's very beautiful, actually. And also this concept of sharing, because then it kind of just sensitizes things. And yeah, even though maybe it's not completely off the chest, it will be woven into some kind of conversational tapestry. But we're aware of it now. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah, no, thank you for saying that. I think that's kind of the beauty, I think, of once you're able to find that space of vulnerability. It's you no longer so much of the pain can come from, okay, I have to act like everything is fine, and in that acting itself, I think, is where a lot of the pain can come from. I guess connecting our first conversation was amazing. For any of the listeners, if you haven't checked that out, I'd definitely recommend starting there. We talked so much about dance, and the way I thought one of the most interesting points of that conversation was talking about how art forms can both at the same time be used as a force of repression, but also for expression and for autonomy and to find freedom. And it's that kind of dichotomy and duality that makes art this beautiful thing. And so we had an amazing conversation. I want to first thank you for even engaging in that, first of all.
Thank you for your beautiful prods and questions and insights. It was really lovely. I felt super inspired after that talk.
Aw. I mean, yeah, you've been doing a lot since then. What has life been like? It's been, I think, 3 weeks since we recorded last. So what has life been like since then?
Life has been intense. So I'm currently in Pakistan again. And yeah, I think the in terms of my personal life, there's like a lot of, let's say, responsibilities. But then on the political level also, I think there's generally like a need to kind of revive this organization, the one you talked about when you introduced me. It's called Lal Hartal. So kind of getting into conversations that are a little bit difficult, trying to figure out how can these platforms be revived and be welcoming spaces for artists and political organizers, especially when in a society like Pakistan, which is kind of, let's say, it's a whole myriad of densities. Like let's say there's the whole, of course, the post-colonial stuff, and also the neo-colonial stuff, where in terms of violence, in terms of epistemological violence, in terms of patriarchal violence. So there's a lot of violence. That's like a running theme. But then even when it's not physically violent, it's somehow the mood, the emotive kind of spaces on the macro and the micro levels, they're very tense. And just knowing, because I'm a mother also, and I like to kind of make it light despite all of it, so that I can be an example for my child. And also, actually, I learn a lot how he deals with stuff. So it's been intense, let's say, these past few weeks. But there was some dance work that I was engaging with. I had a performance. There's something I usually don't do, but that was interesting. And then there was an action, a political action to mark the 1 year of genocide that is taking place currently across, let's say, the Levantine area. And because of the current political problems, like there's a tussle between um, a party that was ousted by the state and the state itself. So what they did was they put containers up around the whole city, so it was inaccessible. And then the action that we had to do, the political action, we basically couldn't do it. So we switched to online, and then we had issues with the internet because the government was blocking some platforms. So it was like constant firefighting. And I think that these few weeks I've been trying to understand what can we do beyond just firefighting, like knee-jerk responses, and something towards a more systemic, a slower, a more meditative and intentional way of thinking about change. So yeah, those were my weeks. How about you?
I mean, I'm really excited to talk about change, and I wanted to touch. I mean, my weeks have been different. I have been privileged to be in the quiet mountains in Japan with very little distraction and a lot of quiet, except for this really loud road that I'm in front of. But it's been interesting. I feel like a lot of the challenges for me have been very internal. Just spending a lot of time in isolation, having to confront just a lot of the obstacles that I've built for myself to do the things that I want to do, to be the person that I want to be. And so confronting some of those things have been really challenging, but very different, I think, from some of the things that you're talking about. But I want to talk about something that I think will set a good foundation for our conversation. But you mentioned this word violence, and how in so many different forms you feel like the environment is violent. I'm curious about in the when you're in an environment where that's kind of the feeling that's coming up. What are your thoughts on what it takes to be hopeful in the face of violence and in the face of kind of feeling like maybe things won't change? What does it take for people to experience hope, and what is hope?
Hmm. I find that this is a very interesting question, because just yesterday I was looking at a man. He was a military officer of some sort, and he had an AK-47 and two pistols, and he had like a lot of weaponry on him. And it was like I was in a space where there was it was like a high profile event, so called, and there was a lot of tight security. And I just watched this man, and I looked at his eyes, and I realized, oh my God, he's so scared, And his eyes were reminding me of my son's eyes when he's scared. And I think to be hopeful, one needs to think about how can one basically combat fear. And I think we talked about this in the last episode when we were in this discussion. And I think it was more like, how can one truly connect in a way of disarming that fear? So disarming a mindset of fear. And once you have that intention, And when you approach something where violence is present, and you approach it with an intention of disarming that violence, not with violence, but with a kind of consciousness that essentially we're all the same, right? Even this person with the gun somehow was at a point in time was a child. And I like to go back into this idea of childhood, because somewhere deep down we're all still those children who have somehow been mutated by society and by these violent structures globally. Yeah. So maybe that's hopeful. I don't know if that's hopeful, but maybe just
No,
connecting, you know?
that's such a beautiful definition, this idea of combating fear. And it is through like addressing the fear and channeling it through in a different medium in which someone can find hope. And I find that there's this unique interplay of faith and kind of like belief that things can be better, things can be different. You touched on change in something that you had said earlier. And being in policy, I think this is one of the most complex things that I think exists, but is very rarely talked about, which is what is good change? I think that's such a complex question. And for some reason, it's just pushed off to the side. Of like, it doesn't really matter. Like, we'll think about what good change actually is later. My question for you is, because you do a lot of work in activism and things, it's a lofty question, but when you think about change, one, what does a world look like to you where you're like, okay, this is a world that I think is better, that I think we have changed from whatever we were and we've moved to a better state? What are some of the traits, or kind of what does this vision look like?
Mm. Lofty question.
Super
But I
lofty. I mean,
like
it's
analogies.
yeah.
Mm. Sorry?
No, super lofty. I'm sorry for throwing it at you.
No, it's great. I like it. Throw it. But I think I like to use analogies quite a bit because maybe I have a simplistic way of thinking. But I think we talked about this last time, about this balance between control and letting go. And
Mm.
somehow, in that kind of a world which has changed in that state, I think we have. Sorry, is there a lot of background noise right now?
No, it's okay. Continue.
No? Okay. You sure? Because
Yeah,
they're
yeah.
like yelling
We
behind
love
us.
hearing
Okay.
people.
Okay. Um, anyhow, so this thing about control and letting go, if one thinks about a changed, actually, I don't know about changed world because I think it's always a process. And that continuation of circumstance, the continuation of an intention, the ability to be flexible with um, reassessing. Okay, I did this. This was what we did. Let's say policy wise, we tried this out, and we did it with an intention of making it work. So we had a time frame for it. But then to be reassessing it after a few years, after a few, I don't know, on a grand level, of course, it would take years, maybe decades to have some kind of societal change. But to be able to evaluate that and to learn from it and critique and be vulnerable, even on these macro levels, and take what we think worked and be able to let go of the things that didn't work, even if that meant that it kept us in power, or that brought power for a few people. And I think it's this idea of staticness. I don't even know if staticness is a word, but you know what I mean? Like a fixed kind of state is the thing that got us here, perhaps. You know, this idea that yes, capitalism will work, yes, it will provide, whereas we know very clearly it doesn't. Or even like a system like communism or Soviet or Chinese communism, that it doesn't work. So how do you move beyond that? How are you able to keep it fluid without being floozy also, you know, like keeping that
Hmm.
intentionality and being responsible. I think taking responsibility, everybody taking responsibility, and that would actually mean sharing power. And that's the kind of world I think would be much, let's say, much better for most.
I really like your answer because in it talks about how we might never reach this one like utopian world because our needs are constantly changing. And so while something may look good now, when that world comes about, new things will arise and there will be new problems that exist. And the important kind of nature, no matter what state you're in, is this willingness to address and be responsible for the decisions that you have taken, to then analyze them and to properly identify what is and isn't working, and then to be creative enough to think of something new and different. And this process, no matter what state you're in, is what's important. Refining this ability to constantly address and change rather than just being like, all right, we made it to this point, it's perfect, even if it's better than where it is now. Once anyone adapts that kind of perspective of like, this is it, we've made it, then you're going to run into the same problems no matter where you're at. I think that's such an interesting point.
It's like evolution, like a kind of emotionally intelligent evolution that links to then economics and all other material things.
You know, one thing I've really been, I feel like, embodied learning as of late is the more I talk about political things with people from around the world, I realize that every country, it's fascinating, has its own set of problems. And it's based on their geography, their resources, the number of people that they have, the jobs that they, whatever it is. Each country and each nation has its own unique set of problems. And I think sometimes what can happen, I want to first talk about this before we talk a little bit more about Pakistan in specific. Coming from the West and the United States in specific, one of the hardest challenges I had is when I would speak to people about the problems I faced in my upbringing of being Indian and what it meant to exist within a caste and so on. I always had to preface it with, but it's not worse. Like, I don't want you to just look down on this entire culture or these people just because what I'm saying may seem problematic through the lens that you look at through the world. But then it's always interesting because people don't look at their own country with those same lenses. Like, a lot of Americans will talk about how it's the best country in the world, and then while it's okay to feel that way, but at the same time completely miss the fact that there's school shootings. I mean the list goes on for a long time. So I want to first talk about, what do you think it is that makes it difficult for people to be able to share about, here, I think these are the problems in my society, but I don't want you to look down on my people or down on my society. How do you think we can establish better, I don't know, a better way to kind of communicate these things without having people look down on us? Are you?
I mean, ideologically speaking, if we change to a more anarchist structure and got done with nation states, that would be the best. But okay, I'll take it down a few notches. That's just my ideological stance. But realistically, let's say in the current system, I think there's a subject that I'm studying these days. It's called transcultural studies. And it's very interesting because scholars look at these flows of knowledge of so-called culture or patterns of living, etc., beyond just blocks of nation states. And I think now it's always been relevant, and we've been reading and studying histories that are tainted with a lot of this, prestige and like patriotism and also proto-patriotism, let's say, like things to do with power associated with kingdoms or empires or civilizations, quote unquote. But I think the best way to kind of get over that is to be like, yes, we are all part of these flawed structures, and they're all flawed, and each one has beauty to it also, because essentially that humans are establishing these, and essentially we're all humans. I think we forget this, that we're actually much more common than we claim not to be, right? That we think that, okay, for example, I'm Pakistani, somebody is Indian or German or so, and then everybody comes around and says, oh yeah, but it's like this there, and it's like this here, and and often I'm being told a lot in Pakistan also that, oh yeah, you critique the country too much, why are you even here? And now that I'm in Germany, I'm told, oh yeah, you criticize Germany so much. And I'm like, no, but it's not just criticizing. I'm living here. I'm trying to establish a community for myself, for my own self, but I'm also trusting people here to be living here, because indeed I have a privilege to be in either of these communities with the way I kind of live. So somehow just trusting people, inherently, it's a trust issue that needs to be resolved.
Hmm. Huh. I like this idea of, and this is something it took me a long time to realize. When you're philosophy changed my life in this way. I feel like when you look at a person and the first thing that comes to mind is like, look at the way you dress, look at the way you eat, look at the way you talk. I don't know those words that you're saying. You can immediately feel like there's such a deep disconnect between you and every other person in the world. I think this happens all the time when, even in the States, when you hear people, talk about, oh, like I see people speaking Spanish. I don't know what language that is. Like, this is an English country. Like, how can you be speaking Spanish? Like, it, it is missing the point that when you like take all these different layers out, and I think philosophy does such a great job of this. At our essence, humans we're all the exact same. We're all just like manifesting our desires through like different mediums based on the cultures that we live in and the things that we've been taught. But our like drive to existence, or drive to reproduce, or drive to whatever, for joy and for passion, and they're all the same. They all exist, underlying all of our actions are the same motivations. And I feel like in that sense, art and dance, and these are all amazing ways to like be able to connect interculturally, because it's we talked about this in the last episode, which is, it's so fascinating. No matter how disconnected your group is from everyone else, somehow music and dance seems to arise everywhere. That's in a phenomenal way where without words you can connect deeply with other people.
Mm. And actually, there's so many more connections than we actually that we're told, or let's say that we regurgitate in a way. I think the constant kind of movement of human beings around the globe, there have been so many connections, so many words. Like, what I'm really interested in, and I'm not very good with languages, but I've always been fascinated with linguistics, and how all these languages, some of them, they have the roots that are similar, and also a lot to do with the movement of especially Roma and Sinti people, and of course many other nomadic people. I think most were nomads before things had to get agriculturally settled. But
Mhm.
yeah, I think that these commonalities, they run through somehow. And like you say, like music, dance, art, feasting, celebrating, mourning, all these ways of just living are so much more common than we can imagine currently.
Mm. I think once you're able to connect with humans like that, that naturally allows you to then talk about the differences that exist within cultures while still humanizing the people that you're talking about. Which then I guess leads me to my next question, which is, in a lot of your work in activism, I guess like from a large perspective, it's hard to, I guess, answer this succinctly, but what would you say are some of the largest challenges that Pakistan faces?
Hmm. Yeah, it's a it's a tough one, because I think since its inception as a state, as a nation state, it inherited this colonial system of order, and which goes into the justice system, the police system, the military, the education. So I think there are parallel problems happening. There's the one that's the post-colonial issues. Then there's, of course, the issue of religion that has become politicized and weaponized since the inception also of the state, but primarily after the 80s. So Islam became I mean, it is, of course, all religions have political sides to them, but the way that the state has infused Islam and a certain kind of Islam that is linked to funding from Saudi Arabia and America, especially when they were fighting against the Soviets in Afghanistan, I think it just deeply created these issues. Like the roots just grew and grew and grew into the psychology of people, especially, I mean, everybody has to deal with them in different ways, but let's say how it affected patriarchy, how it affected people who are not Muslim in the country. Like this, it kind of then overlaps with older problems like caste, and then of course with newer things like after the 70s there was a lot of privatization, so economic problems also. So there's almost no industry left apart from banking and the real estate. So like traditional, let's say classical workers in the sense, you'll find very few, and yet there everybody is struggling and laboring to make things work for themselves to survive, and there are no structures to help, no systems to help the people to survive. Let's say there's the pension, the um, like free and good healthcare, housing is a huge problem. Evictions, forced evictions. Now that's the interesting duality of it, is that this huge land estate mafia is like evicting thousands of people, and very, very fertile land then gets converted to like housing for the few, for the rich. Um, and then ancient spaces like in the south, the Karunjar Mountains, they're being excavated, just like complete chaos, you know. So, and then we have the Chinese influence. And then, of course, not to last, but not even last, but one of them is the current state of unrest in almost all the parts of Pakistan, except for even now the center. So there are voices of dissent against these colonial forces that are brutal, essentially. Enforced disappearances of Baloch and Pashtun people, just the urban spaces also where people protest. It's like one of our comrades, she said, it feels like we are living in a martial law, the way the police and the way the special forces, they just brutalize anyone who's literally, this was 3 days ago, that there was a protest, a peaceful protest against the killing. There was a public lynching. So this links to the psychology of the people, which is linked to, again, I think it's such an intersectional, it's just a cluster of issues that then create this mutant problem, which is then so hard to just say, okay, it's just this one problem, but it's so intersected. So there was a man who was a professor, and he was killed by a mob because he was accused of blasphemy. And this blasphemy law, actually, it came into effect during British colonial law, during the period of Hindu and Muslim riots that were, of course, instigated also thanks to the British. But of course, not only them, but that's me just making it a little too essentialist. But going on, what happened 3 days ago was there was a protest against this, saying that this kind of mob violence and this kind of just killing of a human life, taking a human life on just assumptions that somebody said something blasphemous, it's ridiculous. And what happened was that the police then began arresting people. They began beating people up, men, women, young, old. Why? No one knows. Why did they do that? Actually, because now, because of this, there's a huge unrest, especially among the urban youth who are now unemployed. Like I said, they didn't have state support, they don't have jobs, everyone is precarious. Heavy, heavy inflation, huge inflation, a lot of tax, a lot of bills. No one can pay these bills, like electricity bills are triple the cost of what one can even earn in a month. So there's just a lot of frustration, and then a lot of men who have not had access to let's say understand what their worth is. They run to this kind of indoctrination that is based in hatred, and hatred of anything that is inaccessible. So even an idea of talking about a secular society seems like an imported idea, and therefore these cases of violence against people accused of blasphemy, they happen. And so what happened at the protest, sorry, it's so long drawn out and I've not
No, no,
even
no.
covered half of
No, no,
it.
no.
But apparently there was a police officer who was instigating the other police officers to be violent on the peaceful protesters, and he was someone associated with the right wing group called Tehreek-e-Labbaik Pakistan, which is a right wing. It's a new party that literally is very like its voter base or its base is these frustrated men who are unemployed and who have only had access to a certain version of Islam that has been made to feed off their frustration, essentially. And then, of course, we have the huge problem of patriarchy. And along with that is a feudal understanding of where a woman's place should be, which is, of course, in the home. And now you see, because there's been, since 2018, there have been strikes led by very middle class urban women. But also, I think these strikes kind of seeped into the general understanding of what feminism is. And a lot of women, because of course, you can't stop time, and a lot of women have been going to university and have wanted to excel and live life, basically. And because of that, there's a lot of backlash. So you see a lot of patriarchal violence. So just 2 days ago, a girl in a college was, you know, I'm sorry to say, trigger warning, but raped by a security guard of that institution, and the administration of the college just kept it undercover and didn't let anyone say anything until the girls then led a protest, the girls from that college, who then said, hey, you say it's based on what we wear, or it's based on what time we're going somewhere, and all of these acts of violence, sexual violence, happen to us because it's our fault somehow. But here is somebody who's in the daytime in her uniform in a college, and this happens to her. And then the countless numbers of acts of violence against women, against children, against animals, the list goes on, and it's just such an ambient violence. And of course, that's not just what the whole sum of Pakistan. There's also life going on despite all of this, which I think is so beautiful, that people still manage to make systems of care and giving work despite all of this. And of course, um, we have to see everything in that sum total. But I definitely think that the problems that this country faces are particularly because of this intersection of violent patriarchy, violent colonial brute force, and violent feudal mentality. This like holy grail thing, not so holy grail, unholy. Yeah.
Can you list those three down again? I want to write that down. You said patriarchy. What's the second one?
The military. So let's
Mm.
just say like those who have a monopoly on violence, and also the feudal um, mentality. So there's a thing about women being property, women being one's property, and it's obviously not in the law, but it's something that's just understood like that. And I think the fourth problem is this idea that started from 1947, which was like that Pakistan, no matter where you are from in this region, that basically just means that you are Pakistani and you need to speak Urdu and English, of course, but essentially Urdu, to be more Pakistani, and you have to forget about your mother tongues. And you know how rich it is here. There are so many languages. There's dozens of languages in this region, and there's this, again, it's linked to colonialism, but it's also linked to a very mutated version of colonialism, which is like trying to say you have to be Muslim, you have to be a man, and you have to speak Urdu to be a good Pakistani. And then you have Baloch, Pashtun, Saraiki, Gilgiti, like all these other ethnic linguistic groups, which are so many actually. And coming back historically, Bangladesh, when it was Pakistan, it was East Pakistan. And essentially, the issue started because the founder of this nation state went to Dhaka University and said, "You must speak Urdu and forget about your language." And language is such an interesting thing, right? Because it holds so much. And it's not just language of the of words, it's a non-verbal language also that then gets cancelled in this whole equation of getting people to be patriotic. So this project of making people feel patriotic is linked to the whole creation of a nation state by a man called Radcliffe, who like draws a line on a map to a region he's never been to, and essentially says, okay, this is Pakistan, so forget what you had before. And all of that is then essentially Indian and therefore not pure. And Pakistan means land of the pure. So this idea of a very certain specific purity, it reminds me of this very like Victorian um, castrated kind of I don't know if castrated is a word, but you know what I mean, like, you know, like devoid of any kind of mutation from this box that is identity. And I think that's essentially the problem, is there's an identity crisis also, apart from the material problems.
I wanted to, I guess, break down each one of these points. First of all, thank you for kind of laying down that's a it's a really like hard question to ask. I mean, even when I think about I especially when I travel, a lot of people will say, "So, what do you think is going on in the U.S.?" Or you kind of have to become the spokesperson for an entire nation, which is obviously impossible. But at the end of the day, that being said, there's too many countries in the world. I can't talk to every single person to get a perspective on every country's issues. So I think at some point it is also very helpful to get a glimpse into what can be some of the issues in any particular region. I wanted to talk about, I'm really excited to get into feminism. A lot of your work is in that. It's a season that I haven't covered, and I am very excited to in the near future. And I personally don't. I would like to learn more. So first of all, patriarchy is a word that we've all heard, but I don't actually know exactly what it means. Can we start with the definition of what a patriarchy is?
Patriarchy. Yes. Patriarchy is the idea that someone, this is my understanding, but maybe one could also Google it. But patriarchy is the understanding that someone who is born as a male is basically inherently more powerful and will be treated so societally, economically, religiously, and all these systems of governance, I would say. So it's basically when men are treated as more superior than women. But then, of course, the nuanced idea would be, what kind of a man? Would it be a biological man, a trans man? Would it be a white man, a brown man, a black man? Would it be a rich man or a poor man? And I think that's why feminism has many versions also and many schools. And I think this intersectional feminism and especially anarchist feminism, talks about these nuanced differences within patriarchy also. So, like saying
Mm.
Hillary Clinton is not equal to a man who's been dispossessed of his ancestral home, or let's just say home, that maybe he managed to gather some money and he gets a little hovel in a slum. Do we think that Hillary Clinton or Kamala Harris is inferior to him in this current system? No, of course not. And that's why many people then just brush off feminism like, oh, yeah, women have their rights. Yeah, they have voting rights. And yeah, so. And what's interesting also is that Pakistan is one of the first countries that had a woman prime minister twice. Uh, and a lot of people say, wow, okay, they've never had a woman prime minister in America, right? Am I wrong?
Yeah, we've never had
Or
a,
a president,
president.
let's say.
Yeah.
Hmm. And still, I think there's a lot of window dressing that is done using the term of feminism, but actually it's a structural point
So
about
I have
power
a question.
and essentially. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sorry, a quick question. You had mentioned something in the beginning, which was that patriarchy are systems where men are treated better in some ways. Would it be considered patriarchy if they're simply treated differently, but not necessarily better?
Mm, I would say some feminists would think this, like radical feminists. Yeah.
Hmm.
I was just saying that I do think there are some differences um, because of how societies are structured. So, yeah, essentially, maybe to answer your question, yes, that is patriarchy. Like gender
Hmm.
roles and performativity, like how should a man behave, and how it's not even about superior or anything, but if a man has to behave differently or is treated differently, that is also based on in inequality also, but also, let's just say, difference can also mean inequality, right?
Hmm. I mean, yeah. I mean, I'm really curious because I'm trying to think. I'll explain my experience, and I'm really curious to hear what you think and what maybe a feminist perspective on this would be. I find that for me, learning from the different men in my life who've set an example of to me what it means to be a man, which in itself is a whole conversation. I have found that while it can be toxic for so much of my life, it was. I feel like now, in a lot of ways, it serves as kind of this like really high ideal that I strive for to maybe one day be. And to me, in that definition, a man to me is someone who provides and to be loving and whatever. I mean, and caring and makes people feel safe and is intelligent and whatever, a whole bunch of traits. And obviously this has nothing to, this just has to do with being a great human. It actually has nothing to do with being a man. But there is something, I don't know if it's a biological or social, and it's hard to kind of pin it down. But there is something about some actions making me feel like, I don't know, I feel like a man. Like that when I don't know, when I feel like I'm able to take care of a person, or I don't know, there are things, and I don't know how to kind of what to say about that. Like in this idea of like patriarchy is a system where even different would be like, even having like, okay, this is what a man is, this is what a woman is, would be considered a patriarchal society. I feel like, where do people kind of go to understand what it means? In a not patriarchal society, would gender just not be a thing?
I think that's a very interesting question. I often sometimes feel like a man, and I also
Hmm.
feel like a woman. And I think what does it mean to be a man or a woman, like you say? I think even culturally, there's so many different ways of understanding what are those roles of gender, Um, but I don't think it means this that there would be no gender roles. I just think they would be much more fluid. So a woman could also be giving, a woman could also be providing, A man could also be nurturing and caring. And this goes back to our the initial part of our conversation about how we can be fluid with understanding roles, and that doesn't mean to just take off everything and everyone is like just doing, like, I think that would also then be a certain performativity that is not, let's say, essentially embodied to say, yes, I can be this and this and this and this. And I choose certain things at certain moments. And that's why often I have arguments with friends of mine who identify as a certain gender and get stuck in that, because it's always like, but you are also limiting your capacity for so much other sides that you could explore of yourself, of your personality. Like, there are so many forms of bravery, there are so many forms of timidness or shyness that one can really go into a whole spectrum, and that would really enhance all of our growth as human beings. Like, just beyond these lists. Okay, tick that for man and tick that for woman. Of course, there is a masculine and feminine energy inside. Sorry.
It's totally okay.
One second, sorry.
We normally have technical difficulties. This is the first time we've had a beautiful and very real and authentic family interruption, but it's nice. I mean, I just think it's like, I mean, you know what? Even in my brain, no, not apologize at all. I mean, even in my brain, I was like, edit, blah, blah, blah. But I was like, you know what? Like, I think we try to clean up and professionalize way too much of our existence and of life. Like, how many interviews we have to act like we're this like person, and okay, we have our family is so separate from who we are professionally, like who we get to be, and we will never hear any of their voices. They're so separate. But it's like, it's so terribly unfortunate that we can't just like merge these areas a little bit more like fluidly in our lives. Like, what's so wrong to have your own child walk in your room when you're recording an interview or something for work, or what's honestly, what's so wrong about that?
Yeah. Essentially, this is what we were talking about earlier, but we were talking about gender, but that's what I meant. Like, to have this spectrum and not these boxed ideas like this is personal, this is political, this is career, this is this, but to be able to navigate, and in a way that you're able to take responsibility. Okay, this is my job, and this is my job here, and this is my job here. And job is such a boring word, but you know what I mean? Like, I could be the mother, but then also say, yes, I am talking to somebody here on a podcast, and we're talking about what a mother really means. Does a mother just mean one thing or two things? Or can the mother also play the role of a father, and a father also play the role of a mother, and not clash, but actually it's a kind of choreography. I see it like a choreography of roles that can be changed. Someone sits, someone stands, someone moves, someone still. Dance somehow helps with this imagination of role switching.
So I mean, so here's a question I have for you, because I think this is something I see in the States, and I'm questioning. I see this in a lot of my students, and I feel that someone once shared on this podcast that a lot of social change looks like a pendulum, where you start on one extreme, and then to combat it, you need a lot of inertia to push it. So then you push it, and it goes all the way to the other extreme, and then the same thing happens, and you kind of go through this process. Hopefully, eventually, you reach a nice like middle ground. I feel like for so long, we've felt oppressed by our roles, that we're like, we want to break free, we want to be free. But I feel like I would consider myself someone who's over a long time in my life. I've broken out of a lot of the chains that were placed on me, and now that I feel a lot more free, I'm kind of like, now what? Like, where do I go from here? I mean, I built my identity on being a rebel for so long. Now that I'm free and I have nothing to rebel against, I'm like, now I kind of have to build my identity around something completely different. And I think then you start seeking for some sort of structure. You start seeking for something, some sort of, to give your identity some shape, to be like, okay, this is what I am, so I can understand how I fit into the larger world around me. And
Mm.
then things like, I am this religion, I am this person from this
Mm.
country, or I am this gender, start to help, because it forms some sort of identity for you, so you can understand yourself. Otherwise, it can.
Mm.
So one thing I have a tough time with is like, I know a lot of men who find a lot of meaning in their lives through like their understanding of what it means to be a man. It seems to me to be sometimes, I don't know, can it be damaging to just remove that system altogether, to where like it could be anything, like figure it out for yourself, where then people who may have found meaning through that now are kind of lost. I don't know. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that it would be very, very utopian to think that this would not be linked to material conditions, like follow the money kind of thing. So, this burden also of being a man is also very much linked to being someone who's the giver, who provides, who earns, who sustains, who looks after, and and yes, that is part of being a man, but it's also linked to the structures of the values that we have. And like you said, it's easier this way, of course, because everything that we don't know instills fear in us, because we just think, okay, this is easy. I subscribe to this religion, this sexuality, this gender. Everything is then a set for us, so that we don't need to worry more than I mean, I think that what is the point of life if not break out of those structures and, like you said, create new ones, but maybe taking things from the old. No one's saying that you need to wipe away everything. I think it means to be conscious of that. Being a man, finding that like like you find your space saying you are something, but then being conscious of what does that mean, and how can I, even as a woman, I would say there are some kinds of like patriarchal gains and bargains that women have that uphold this system of inequality. And I think that many women, and it's a pretty unpopular opinion, but I will say it here also, is that actually the patriarchy stays often, well, of course, because of the powerful men, but also because of the powerful women who are in the patriarchy. And I think those roles then are not such a big problem as long as they're not so embedded in power that cannot be shared. And
Hmm.
that links to a kind of greedy patriarchy that is linked to greedy capitalism or greedy imperialism or greedy colonialism. And the greed that comes from holding these positions needs to be analyzed and deconstructed, and possibly one can maintain these masculinities without oppressing others. I wonder.
Hmm. I mean, it's so interesting, because I think so. Okay, this is what I'm thinking. I'm kind of just brainstorming here. So I'm most likely, I have no idea what I'm talking about, but I'd love to kind of get your input. But I'm going to brainstorm here, which is like, what are the things that are needed for an identity to be formed, and a strong enough identity to where it cannot. So one, I believe identity has to be something that can be it can stand the weather. So like, it can't be something that you feel one day and then the next day it changes, because it has to be something you can identify at on a daily basis, so that you can extract some form of like meaning from that identity. So like, I am a feminist. Like, even that is a particular identity that like a lot of people might extract. Okay, this is what it means, this is who I am,
Mm,
this is what gives my life meaning and purpose, and I'm going to act in this way. And the identity of a student or a philosopher, it has to be something that withstands time, so it's not changing day by day, because then you can't really like sink into your identity. So that's one. And then so that's essential. And then two, other people have to kind of like play along with your game. At the end of the day, all these identities are just a game that we're just building to like make sense of the world. But for your identity to make sense deeply to you, other people have to also like recognize that that is what you're identifying as, and also that that is like a real thing that you care about. So if you're like, I'm a student, but everyone else is like, no, you're not. You're, I don't know, whatever. They think you're something else. Then your identity can't be like withheld to that. So in that sense, what you're proposing to me sometimes I feel like sounds like if everyone kind of gets to pick what it means to like navigate through these nuances of like you can be in the middle of these masculine and feminine traits and whatever. Um, doesn't that form of identity just cease to exist because it doesn't withhold one, it doesn't withhold the weather, and it's not something that stays permanent?
Exactly. I'm very, and if I could be anything, I would be uh, a identitarian. So I don't believe in identity as being a singular thing. I think it's not something that you can say, oh, yes, I'm one thing one day and one thing one day. The opposite. Obviously, there are values that one subscribes to. But then, if it's just that box that comes in, replacing something like class or caste or gender, and of course, it goes into a lot of identity politics is linked to gender and sexuality these days. But essentially, I think the living conditions, which is class based, is such a platform or a basis for everything else that we identify with or have the privilege also to identify with. I know so many people who would, if they could, identify as another gender or another sexuality, but they just can't because they don't have that privilege. So, I think it's great. I'm not saying it shouldn't be there and people should choose and pick what they are. And it is actually a spectrum. And it is very scary to say this, I know. But somehow, what society gives us, like, are you this or this? Are you that or that? But then just saying, my whole existence is the sum of these things, that also really, really cuts down on our potential as human beings. Because there's so much more to know. There's so many more things to explore. And clearly our world is right now in a crisis and multiple crises. And I think it's these identities that have created a lot of these problems that are linked, of course, to these structures of power and economic injustice. And somehow this identity politics has been woven to kind of just keep people in these spaces of, oh yeah, I identify as this and I identify as that, and that's my fight. That is the reason I struggle against the system. Whereas it also just makes our understanding of the other, of anyone who is outside our box, as something much more simplistic than it actually is. Because it's very possible that the man who seems patriarchal and who is patriarchal and who's acting out his patriarchy in many terrible ways actually never had the chance to even understand what else there is because of the economic and political structure. So I think it's so tied into a complete systemic change that goes beyond identity politics. So I think maybe identity is not a singular. You know how there's some words in English where like phenomena or stuff like that.
Yeah.
Maybe identity is just identity and not identities because it is identities. Sorry, it's very confusing what I just said. I just mean maybe identity is actually plural and there is no singular identity. Not maybe, pretty sure. I mean, that's what intersectional feminism talks about.
So I guess here maybe I have a question for you. This is actually so interesting. I'm like really fascinated right now. You can't see my face, but I'm very, very interested. Okay, so what would you? Okay, so let's say I was thinking about this example of like, let's say I believe I'm not fast, but let's say I believed I was a fast runner. I could, if I said something like, I'm faster than a dog. I'm faster than the my neighbor's dog, a very specific, that isn't like an identity. That's like a fact. It's like I am faster than this dog. But if I said something along the lines of I am a fast runner, then I've now taken on the identity of someone who is fast. It's no longer just like a statement or a fact. It is something that has become larger than that. It's become an identity. And so I
Mm-hmm.
feel that humans give themselves structure by attaching
Mm.
themselves to all types of tiny little identities. And gender is just one of them. And like you said,
Mm-hmm.
it's one that happens to have a lot of influence in the world. But then there's also a whole bunch of other identities. I think people's profession plays a huge role. Like, you are
Mm.
not a doctor, you are just someone who works as a doctor, which is very different than being a doctor. And so in that sense, I'm curious, just for you, when you think about who Amna is, do you think about like this floating being with like no identity, or do you still take some words to like give yourself some shape, like I am this, I am that?
Yeah, so I think this is also brainstorming on my point, but I do really want to be a being that doesn't float but kind of goes into different trajectories. And I think, unfortunately, given the current way we live, I have identities that if I just say, oh, yeah, I'm working class, that's bullshit. I'm not working class. I belong to a very privileged family. And perhaps that is why I am able to dance the way I dance publicly, without, well, till now, any threat to my life. Um, and so I need to be cognizant of certain identities, but there's a difference between the lived identities we have and just adhering to them and saying, okay, yes, this is my privilege, or this is what I like, or I'm bi, or I'm a mother, or I'm this or that. You know, to say beyond what is beyond myself, right? Is it's my choice, of course. I'm not saying everyone should adhere to it. I would love it if people could adhere to just beyond self expression and self identification, because it hasn't worked yet, just thinking about ourselves. and
Mm,
and and uh, I think we need to be cognizant of so many kinds of identities. And somebody who's I've been brought up in a city or a region in this country which is completely unaware of all the other identities, let's say ethnic identities, that fill up this country. So most people, let's say in Punjab, will call people from Balochistan a term that they do not identify themselves as the term Balochi. And chi is actually a kind of way of making something sound smaller than it is. And they identify as Baloch, and their language is Balochi. But you will hear across this country, wherever there's people from the so-called center, they will talk about people from so-called peripheral lands as something else. They will not even take the name they use for themselves, and that is a big problem. So if I was someone from this area and I refused and I identified myself as this person and I continued a kind of culture of uh, derogatory terms for others, which is now what is seen in these other spaces, that Punjabi is used as a swear word because Punjabi are those in power, and then they say, yes, you're like a Punjabi. When they're abusing each other, that's the swear term, because Punjabi is that identity now that is associated with complete ignorance, because the power is so overwhelming and there's just extractive power. So similarly, I use this as an analogy for another kind of identity. So if I say, yes, I feel like a man, right? Or if I feel like I'm straight or gay, even. I've seen a lot of misogynistic gay people. And and then therefore canceling other identities, or just even not recognizing. I think that's the main thing, is to be able to recognize the other for what they are and stay in whatever you want to be yourself. That's fine. but to be cognizant that there is the other always, apart from the self. I don't know. I was also brainstorming. I don't know what I said.
No, I even as no, even like I'm hearing this little voice of compassion within myself right now as I'm hearing you talk, which is telling me, a lot of women that I've dated have always told me this, but I think throughout my life I've always questioned what it meant to be a man. I dealt with some whatever like physical ailments throughout my life that always made me like question like, am I a man enough to be able to be as strong as the other boys or whatever, so on and so forth. From a young age, I always questioned like, am I a man? And as I've gotten older and older, I find myself asking myself that question so much less. And it's not because I am for some reason like fitting into the role so much better. I think in a lot of ways I've just found peace within the fact that I really liked what you said, which is that you can, when you don't have to identify as one particular thing, you can fit and match whatever it is that your particular environment needs. If you're in an environment where you need to take on the role of traditional and conventional masculine traits, then you can do that. But if there is not a need for that and you need to take other roles, then you can also do that. You can be the caregiver, you can also be the provider, you can be the student, you can be the teacher. You can play this kind of this dichotomy of being all types of different people and not having to necessarily be like, this is who I am in all given moments. In do you so what this kind of sounds to me like, it sounds very spiritual in nature, where there's even this like simple quote of like, you're not a human being, you're a being who's having a human experience. It's like this very like transcendental, I don't know if I'm saying that word right, transcendental, whatever, where it's like you're like becoming larger than like a person, and you're kind of just like being, you're a being. Do you feel like feminism in that sense is very connected to this like spiritual kind of like become larger than yourself, or are they kind of different?
I do think so. I think that there are, of course, certain kinds of feminism I don't agree with, but the one I subscribe to, it really takes from these, let's say, many universal, for lack of a better word, belief systems which are rooted in the goddess traditions, which talk about Gaia or Dhartima or Pachamama, or there's so many names, and the earth essentially being that mother to us. But again, I think mother is not just. I've seen some fathers who have such beautiful traits of motherhood and who've been so mothering. So it's also beyond the, like you're saying, spiritual and also intellectual, to kind of break these boundaries that have been imposed on us. That what is the hegemonic idea of a man or a hegemonic idea of a woman, just so that the system runs smoother. And yes, it has its perks, right? Like, then people are less confused, people are doing their job better, they're getting into marriages, they're having children, they're working and so these identities, they really help the hegemonic system stay in place. And anything that questions that then sounds radical or sounds like something that wants to change the system. And essentially, I think I'm now embracing this identity of mine, which is like, yes, I want to change this system. Possibly not completely. I don't think any system can completely break, like you said about the pendulum. I think that things are like oceans, like societal change and political change. Like, when an ocean goes like a wave, there's a wave that comes, there's an ebb and a flow. And the ebb and the flow, if you see like some kind of, there's a really lovely word for it. Uh, flotsam and jetsam, thanks to my colonial English training.
Man.
But yes, on the coast of Karachi, I've seen, of course, not such beautiful things, but like, of course, plastic and syringes, and they come and they go, and then they come and they go. So like that systemic change, I don't think you can completely dismantle structures without uh, addressing the root cause, right? Like the root cause is inequality that is based inside the spirit and the intellect and the psyche of individuals, of everyone. And it's not just dualistic and dichotomous like the rich versus the poor. I think it's so much more nuanced than that because there's so much aspiration, there's so much psychologically inside us that that tries to grapple with identity, with aspiration, with ideas of liberation. And everyone's idea of liberation is different, I think, but the the main value should be the same, at least, which is that everyone is entitled to freedom, which is not such a crazy idea, right? That we should all be free. Um, but what is freedom? And then we can philosophize it. But I think the main thing to do is to at least get people out of bondage and war and occupation and like the basic stuff, right? Like, hey, can I have good water or no landmines, please? So I don't know. I feel like it's important also. Of course, philosophy roots are the essence of why we still survive, right? But to make it go hand in hand with very important, pressing topics that are sometimes compartmentalized only for the experts. And I think we're coming back to that, this compartmentalization of things that needs to just somehow open up. Keep those lines, keep those understandings, but be able to flow through them,
Mm.
right? I don't know.
Mm. I mean, I'm feeling this conversation has just been making me feel very like accepting of myself in a lot of ways. It's just like I don't actually need to pin down who I am with any given word. I mean, it's been something I've recently been. I was writing a little bit. I've been building a website and I've been writing a little bit about who I am. And I had a moment of just I was really happy about myself. I was like, I have taken on the form of a lot of different people in I haven't been alive that long, but in the time that I have been alive, I've taken on the form of a lot of different people. And in that it's hard to just be like this is who I am because who I am today was not who I was a year ago and it wasn't who I was 2 years ago or 3 years and every year it's kind of
Mm.
like I take on a different identity in a lot of ways. And so in that sense, I it's taken me some time to just accept myself for that and not try to be like, are you a man enough? Like you need to do
Mm.
X, Y, and Z better so you can be a man one day. Like I mean, I feel like there was so much of my life where I kind of had that negative talk happening. But I don't think, in my personal opinion, the issue is actually in wanting to feel or be a man. I think the issue is actually in how I defined what a man was. I think this striving, in my opinion, for a lot of the men that I know who like strive to be a man, I think it pushes them in a direction that makes them want to be the best version of themselves in a lot of ways, which I think is absolutely fine and is a beautiful journey for each person to go through. And to me, what being a man means is pushing myself to work towards being the best version of myself possible in so many different ways. And I find a lot of joy in that kind of the mission and the journey of that. But I guess earlier the issue was my definition of masculine was so limited and a lot more like harsh that I feel like it didn't lead me towards this like newer goal of becoming a better person. I don't know. You know what I mean?
Yes, and I think your definition will also keep changing, as does
Mm.
mine. As a child, I was often told, "Oh, I'm too much like a boy." And even now, I think just yesterday, someone said, "Oh, yeah, you're such a man." And and yeah, I don't. And also, I have some friends who were asking me if I want to try taking testosterone to like transition, which is a very interesting thing, but I don't feel it. And honestly, I don't feel particularly effeminate in many ways, but I don't feel particularly masculine either. And some people, it always is about how people look at you, which angle they look at you from. So, from some angles, maybe some people see you as a really masculine man. And from some people, like, so it's always changing. And for myself also, I think inside my body, I feel like, of course, I am biologically a woman, but I don't think too much about that. And of course, everyone is entitled to think about their gender aspirations in different ways. Uh, but just to be cognizant that it will keep changing, and the idea of what it is to be a man or a woman is,
Mm,
because it's so linked to social values and because society is constantly changing and evolving, hopefully, or de-evolving, I don't know, but these ideas, especially with social media and stuff, things about masculinity get, like, like K-pop, for example. That's so interesting, right? Because man, I think they banned it in China, or maybe I'm spreading misinformation. I'm not sure, but K-pop, the K-pop boy bands or whatever, they're not very masculine, so called, per
hmm.
se, as traditional ideas of what masculinity is. But yet they are super popular, and then a lot of guys try to, at least I've seen a lot of young boys trying to emulate K-pop style. And I find that so interesting, right? That these definitions of what it is to be a
Mm.
man or a boy or whatever
They can change
also
so
change
quickly.
a lot.
Yeah.
Mm.
Huh. That is so interesting. I mean, if okay, so I mean, okay, this I guess we can tie it back. I feel like I'm so excited to listen back to both these episodes, the last one and this one. We've just created such a
Same.
masterpiece, in my opinion, of
Mm.
just so many important topics.
I love
But
it.
connecting this to
Mm.
education, I feel like, what are your thoughts on how this kind of, in your own teaching, how do you kind of like push this forward? Because I think even in a lot of these like dance forms, it's usually women who dance Bharatanatyam. Is that correct?
No, men also do actually. And
Okay,
the
but
ones who were teaching Bharatanatyam initially were men, the Nattuvanars, which is interesting.
hmm.
But sorry, what's your question?
No, so cool. I guess I was just, how do you, through your own teachings, kind of challenge the way someone might look at what it means to be whatever? I mean, successful even in that art form. I feel like you have to really start questioning a lot of things when you start questioning your identity, because then you have to be like, okay, the structures that place these identities, are they wrong? You got to really start questioning a
Mm.
lot.
Yeah, yeah. I actually had to bear the brunt of this quite a bit. I somehow there was a film that was made on my teacher, my guru, and the filmmakers. At that point, I was also her only student who was actively dancing and earning money like professionally. I was the only student of hers um, who was employed by this government institution. I think I told you about that earlier. And this film basically followed me and my other work also, so the political work. And once the film came out, it was the filmmaker's decision, but they kind of portrayed it in a way that, and because my guru also said in a speech that yes, she is now my successor, right? And her training was a very specific form of Bharatanatyam that she learned in the early 50s, I'd say. Um, and it has changed a lot also. But I think what's very interesting is that it was around this period where there was this kind of friction between her family and myself and the filmmakers, where they thought that I am trying to co opt her style. And a lot of people, even now, like say, yes, Amna is one of the few classical dancers of the country. And of course, we know because dance is very a taboo subject, anyways. But like I was talking about parallels, so there are so many parallel forms of, let's say, accepting a certain kind of thing while rejecting the whole thing. It's very contradictory. It's mind boggling. But anyhow, coming back to what I bore the brunt of was I was at this point also in conversation with a scholar and a dancer who is from Tamil Nadu, but originally, let's say, and now is in Portland, America. And she is a Brahmin, and she is somebody who talked about. 1 second, I'll tell you something. 1 second, sorry.
That's so cute. Ah, man. Kids are great.
Sorry. So basically, this dancer scholar from Portland, introduced me to somebody's work. His name is Devesh Sonaji, and he is a scholar who talks about the inherent casteism present in dance forms such as Bharatanatyam and Kuchipudi also. But he talks about how a whole group of women from a certain class were not allowed to dance this dance form, and it then became co-opted by rich Brahmin women who wanted to further the nation project of India. So therefore, India is now, let's say, the term Bharatanatyam is seen as this like national emblem, right? Anyhow, so back to my story, I started saying, hold on, I don't know if I want to identify. डर लग रहा था तो फिर उसने इजरायली बल्ब वो लगा दी. ठीक है, 1 सेकंड मैं बात कर लूं. Sorry. Oh my god, this I think you would have to edit. But
I can't.
whatever,
Now it's
you
the
like.
ongoing. It's an ongoing trope now.
That created a big rift between my teacher and me because I don't know if you've seen some videos on YouTube. I even have some like online bullying, like, what is this? What are you doing? You were taught all of these things, and now you're doing this like terrible work, substandard work. Because I actually, along with the dance education, I was also trying to venture into things like street theater with my comrades, and also looking into ways that are not so classicized, I don't know, but to an audience that has never even seen a woman's body on stage without thinking it's somebody who's doing it under duress or for sex work or something. So I changed some movements, and I love, like I said earlier in the earlier episode, I love to collaborate. So bringing non-dancers, bringing different kinds of bodies onto not even the stage, but more like a public space. So this work was was seen as something that went antagonistically to my identity as a so-called classical dancer. So I think I'm now, because of all the interruptions, I'm forgetting your question, but I hope it answered it in some way. But
No,
you can
so
remind
yeah,
me.
you were, yeah. So I mean, you brought up, I think, what you had to kind of do to get to that point. As a teacher yourself now, how do you
Oh,
kind of,
yes.
help, or what do you do to allow your students to feel free to explore their identity?
Yeah. So in the classroom, how I have been in, let's say, because I taught a course on power and aesthetics a few semesters ago, and I really tried to challenge this idea by, like you had said, also like learning from the students. So essentially putting everyone on the spot. Which of course some people were not comfortable with at first, but once the discomfort gave way for just being openly vulnerable, people began to share and talk about things from their own communities and cultures. And this was a class that I taught in Heidelberg, so there was a lot of different kinds of nationalities. So basically, I like to make it a space where I learn too. And so when I'm dancing and teaching dance, I will understand that the body types are, it's very, very, let's say, policed. Classical dance, so called classical dance, is often policed because of what kind of body you have. If you're not a certain figure, they won't put you in the center when you're performing. They won't, if you're not fast enough, you won't get a spot, right? And it's okay. I get it. I had some conversations where someone explained to me also that this is to set a standard, right? To set a standard, you need to have this kind of rigorous training. That I get. I understand that. It's good to have rigorous training. But the standards that we set, I question those. Because what does it mean to be super fast? when you're doing 30 spins in 1 second and people clap for you and, oh my God, that's amazing. Just keep spinning and keep spinning. But if there's no thought process to why are you spinning? But that's just me, right? There can be other people who like just do it for the aesthetics of, yeah, someone spinning fast looks good. Fine, that's great. But when you're making art and you're making art to kind of question those standards, then what I do often in my work is, especially when I'm working with a group of people, I like to take what everybody has and make them create after giving them some tools. So let's say, okay, this is a step. You can learn it. You should learn it if you want. If you want to be here, that's the intention you come with, right? To be like, yes, I need to learn something. I want to learn something. That's why I'm here to learn. And once I've learned it, I'll take what I want from it. And I don't have to take it fully also. That's totally fine. And that's the thing I challenge a lot when I'm teaching, is that this is the move, this is the idea, this is the thought. Come, talk about it, deconstruct it, but give me something, create something. I think the essence of resisting the dominant status quo is to create in return. It's not just to resist or run away. Like my whole life, I felt like I'm just pushing back, pushing back, pushing back. But once I grew older, I realized, hey, that's not enough. What can you give as an alternative? What creation can you make? It doesn't have to be amazing. Not everybody will love it. But if you hold your truth to it, and if you're in that teaching and learning thing, and if you have that trust with the person you are learning from, or the person you are teaching, so called, so then I feel that barrier, that hierarchy that often gets abused by a teacher, which is often linked to, okay, I hold this knowledge and you must bow down to me. And then I will think about when you are ready to take that knowledge from me. And I'm just wondering that when you were learning as a teacher, my question to that teacher is, when you were learning, just because you got treated this way, do you have to reproduce that kind of horrible oppression? Because the teaching space is such a sacred, it's a flow, it's a symbiosis. Like you said, we learn from our students also. I think you said this before we began recording. But we learn so much and we give so much. And it's a constant give and take in the space of learning.
Wow.
And
I had a moment of just like euphoria. I mean, I think what you were saying was just so profound and beautiful. I think this whole concept of the best form of learning is when content is given to you and you are asked to not reproduce it exactly the way it was given, to actually have the freedom to take what you want from it and to create whatever it is you want, is in itself such a beautiful definition of education, and something that I don't even think is really often thought about so much. Education so often is just, can you reproduce well? This idea that, what if good education is where you're actually given the tools to create what you want from what it is that you're given? I mean, that is phenomenal. I
you
mean, I
said
just want
it
to
so
say
beautifully. You said it so beautifully. But yes, that's the point. Thank you for
wow.
summing that up. Wow.
I
I
feel like we
often
had to go on that
meander.
whole journey to get to that. No, we had to go on that whole journey. No, I mean, I think it really set the foundation for what it is that this like real nugget that I think is very, very crucial. Wow. I want to say thank you so much for coming on again. I mean, I really am glad we were able to explore it for 3 hours, I think, probably total.
Whoa. Yes, it was beautiful. Thank you, Gautam. You always inspire me. Thank you.
Oh, that's sweet.
Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
thanks. And to anyone
You're so
listening,
lovely.
thank you. To anyone who's listening, thank you so much for your time. If you're interested in more of Amna's work, I will be attaching her website and other details to the show notes. And most likely the website will be out by this time this episode gets released. So you can catch all the details on the website.
Super old. I mean, it's old, but it's not updated. So I'm going to try and update it by the time this episode is out.
Okay. And that brings us to the end of our conversation. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Thank you again for listening and making this process so much more enjoyable. If you haven't had the chance to already, make sure to subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, Google, and Apple Podcasts to get the latest updates on new episodes. If you've been learning useful information here, feel free to leave a review as well. A little bit goes a long way in spreading this podcast. And have a wonderful day. And as per usual, stay re-educated.